2015 to reduce emissions. Well, experts and politicians will be gathering in Poland today with this simple message: there is no plan B. They will be trying to reaffirm targets for carbon emissions as extreme weather events become ever more common around the world. However, activists fear world leaders lack the commitment to meet those targets. Sky Science correspondent Thomas Moore reports now from Katowice, ahead of the UN's 24th Conference of the Parties.
From the fossil fuel power stations of Poland to the coal mining wastelands of Bavaria and the occupied bridges of London, ordinary people rising up against climate change. Extinction Rebellion wants its protesters to be arrested and even to go to prison, a dramatic gesture of just how urgently they believe world leaders need to act. Annie Randall went to the United Nations Climate Summit in Paris 3 years ago, where politicians did a deal on limiting global temperature rise to 2 degrees. She'll be in Poland for this week's summit, but she's disillusioned.
I don't have much faith in the agreements like Paris, because I think they're not up to date. I think that even the Paris Climate Agreement is behind in terms of scientific data. It's way too conservative. It's essentially greenwashing.
There is growing evidence that we are already feeling the effects of climate change. 2018 has brought extreme droughts, floods and typhoons. Scientists warn the planet is responding to a warmer atmosphere faster and more dramatically than they had predicted.
The planet has been sending us some very strong messages, particularly over the last year. So we've seen in all parts of the globe too much water, too little water, fires, extreme events, damages. And we know that the world has now warmed a degree relative to pre-industrial, and this is kind of a red flag, really, or we know that it won't be too long if we're not careful before we hit that 1.5 degree guardrail.
This week's Poland summit will set down the rule book for implementing the Paris deal, but it's taken 3 years to even get this far. The pledges made so far by countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions fall well short of what's needed to hold global temperature rise to 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. And with the United States intent on withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, it will make the job for delegates much harder. President Trump has rejected the Paris deal as bad for American coal miners. Climate change, he has said, is a hoax.
There's concerns that if the United States exits the agreement, then other countries might as well, making it harder to achieve the changes that we need.
According to scientists, we need to cut carbon emissions twice as quickly as the politicians have so far agreed. But they and the activists gathering in Poland have little hope that the delegates inside will actually deliver. Thomas Moore, Sky News in Katowice, Poland.
Well, let's speak to Thomas Moore now. He is live in Poland at that conference for us. And Thomas, this is quite a technical conference, isn't it? So talk to me about the kind of things they're hoping to achieve there over the next few days.
So on the agenda are two main things, Sarah Jane. So the first one is that they're trying to agree the way they're going to monitor, report all their carbon reductions to see if we're heading for the kind of targets that they agreed in Paris. That's called the rule book. The second thing is that this climate fund, which they've all agreed, $100 billion a year going to be paid into, and that will be distributed to developing countries that of course don't have the means to make the kind of transition that's needed. But behind the scenes is a much more important thing that's going on, and that is trying to make the politicians and bureaucrats here be far more ambitious in the carbon cuts that they're going to agree in 2 years' time, in 2020. They want to set the agenda for that already, because we only have 12 years left to make significant changes to our economy, to decarbonize it, if we're going to hold back global temperature. And as I said in that report, when you've got the United States barely here and China then taking over as the lead for climate negotiations, the EU being distracted by Brexit, of course, all these factors mean that perhaps it's not going to get as much attention here as it really needs.
OK, Thomas, thank you. More from Thomas throughout the course of that conference in Poland here on Sky News.
And
NASA scientist has warned that the world is on the brink of a mini ice age due to an extreme lack of sunspots. The sun is entering one of the deepest solar minima of the space age. Drive. Tony Phillips warned in September. Zero.com reports, a prolonged solar minimum could mean a mini ice age. The last time there was a prolonged solar minimum, it did, in fact, lead to a mini ice age which was scientifically known as the Maunder minimum. Com's Max Livo writes that sunspots have been absent for most of 2018 and Earth's upper atmosphere is responding, says Phillips, the editor of SpaceWeather.com. The bad news, according to Phillips, is, it also delays the natural decay of space junk, resulting in a more cluttered environment around Earth. It could happen in a matter of months, says Martin Mlynczak of NASA's Langley Research Center on the cold snap that may be coming. If current trends continue, it could soon set a space age record for cold, says Mlynczak. We're not there quite yet, he said. However, months is not all that far away. Data from NASA's timed Thermosphere, Ionosphere, Mesosphere Energetics and Dynamics satellite shows that the thermosphere, the uppermost layer of air around our planet, is cooling and shrinking, literally decreasing the radius of the atmosphere. This reduction of solar activity could result in a global cooling phase. The thermosphere always cools off during solar minimum. It's one of the most important ways the solar cycle affects our planet, said Mlynczak. According to The New American, the new NASA findings are in line with studies released by UC San Diego and Northumbria University in Great Britain last year, both of which predict a grand solar minimum in coming decades due to low sunspot activity. Both studies predicted sun activity similar to the Maunder minimum of the mid-17th to early 18th centuries, which coincided to a time known as the Little Ice Age, during which temperatures were much lower than those of today. It isn't difficult to prepare for the solar minimum and a much cooler climate, but it will take some time and getting used to. Give yourself ample opportunity to gather enough supplies and make sure you...
The continuing tale of global warming. Now this is being broadcast, even as NASA has come out with the official figures that the past 2 years have been the coldest years ever recorded, despite the fact that those like Sky News and the BBC and everybody else who are on board for the climate change agenda have not failed to mention it. There are some warnings now coming from all quarters that we're actually in an ice age now. Even as this is being broadcast by Sky News, we are actually in an ice age. Last year there was early snow practically everywhere on Earth, and yet it was ignored. Now, in view of the fact that NASA itself is suggesting that the Earth is cooling at a rapid rate, that we're already in a situation where there are no sunspots. I don't think there has ever been any recorded period where there has been no sunspots. And the fewer the sunspots, the cooler the Earth. So there are dire warnings coming that the entire northern hemisphere could soon be like a snowball. And yet there's not a word coming from people like Sky News warning people to prepare to get in a little bit of food at least, and cross your fingers that the ice age will disappear in springtime, so you can at least have summer to try and grow some food for the following winter. But whatever, whether NASA's reports have been fiction or not, I don't know, because you can't trust anything that comes from NASA. It doesn't really matter. It's being reported. Many people, there's all sorts of programs, television programs from all across the world, where experts have been discussing what is happening. And yet Sky News are continuing with this nonsense about every time you have a forest fire somewhere, that's because of climate change that can be changed by reducing CO2 emissions, when in actual fact, experts are suggesting that we have a lower CO2 content of the atmosphere than in any recorded past times. So they're talking nonsense, plus the fact that CO2 isn't a greenhouse gas anyway. It's a trace gas. Trace means very little of it. So there is very little to get rid of. So if you even interfere with the amount that we've got, it will have disastrous effects for the greenery of the earth. Okay, let's listen to what Sky News have to say.
From the fossil fuel power stations of Poland to the coal mining wastelands of Bavaria and the occupied bridges of London, ordinary people rising up against climate change. Extinction Rebellion wants its protesters to be arrested and even to go to prison, a dramatic gesture of just how urgently they believe world leaders need to act. And